Imagine your lungs blistering from the inside as molten metal floods your throat, your screams drowned in a bubbling river of gold. That's how Marcus Crassus, one of the richest men in Rome, allegedly met his end. His captors believed it was fitting justice a man who lived for gold should die by it. But that was just the beginning. History is full of horror, but the darkest corners belong not to the battlefield or plague-ridden cities, but to the execution grounds. Because when ancient empires wanted to send a message, they didn't just kill. They staged nightmares. This video will take you deep into 5 of the most gruesome, sadistic, and unholy executions ever recorded. If you think drawing and quartering was bad or that crucifixion was the height of cruelty, think again. What you're about to see is worse. Much worse. Imagine the sensation of your throat melting from the inside, your vocal cords disintegrating, your chest swelling with liquid fire, your body jerking violently as boiling metal floods your lungs. Your skin blisters and blackens, but your brain remains cruelly awake long enough to feel it all. Every scream trapped inside a mouth sealed by molten gold. This isn't a fantasy cooked up by a horror novelist. This is how one of the richest men in human history is said to have died. Marcus Licinius Crassus. Rome's wealthiest elite, who bathed in silver and fed on conquest, allegedly met his end with a river of molten wealth surging down his gullet, punished by his enemies. Not just with death, but with a poetic vengeance designed to haunt the memory of power forever. But Crassus's fate was merely a warning shot. History is steeped in cruelty, but the execution grounds of the ancient world were where civilization bared its darkest soul. Death wasn't enough. It had to be slow. It had to be theatrical. It had to be unforgettable. Because when ancient empires wanted obedience, they didn't just punish. They turned killing into a spectacle of fear. The body wasn't simply destroyed, it was desecrated, transformed into a canvas for terror. You might think, horror beheadings, crucifixions, public hangings. But what you're about to witness in this journey will test the very limits of imagination. These weren't executions. They were masterpieces of pain. We'll go deep, uncomfortably deep, into the top 5 most gruesome executions ever recorded in ancient history. You'll meet the man who was skinned alive while still breathing, the tyrant who turned human screams into music, the victim who was slowly eaten alive by insects while floating in his own filth, the condemned soul whose body was split clean in half while still conscious, and the legend of a living corpse impaled by the steady growth of bamboo through his flesh. These weren't random punishments, they were statements, rituals, warnings carved into flesh to be remembered for generations. And as we peel back the layers of history, what you'll see isn't just violence, it's creativity applied to cruelty, intelligence sharpened into a knife. So brace yourself. What lies ahead isn't just historical retelling, it's a descent into the most deranged imaginations the ancient world ever produced. And it all begins with the man who died the richest and perhaps the most agonizing death of all. Marcus Crassus, the man who died drinking gold. Marcus Licinius Crassus was not just rich, he was Rome's personification of greed. He made his fortune buying up the homes of the desperate, during fires owning silver mines and operating his own private fire brigade that would only extinguish flames if the property owner sold the land to him first. In today's numbers, he would have been a multi-billionaire. But Crassus didn't just want wealth. He wanted glory, military triumphs, fame, power to rival Caesar and Pompey, and that hunger would become his undoing. In 53 BCE, Crassus launched a military campaign against the Parthian Empire, modern-day Iran and Iraq. He had no real cause, no support from the Senate, just a thirst to match the military legends of his peers. But the Parthians were no easy prey. With expert cavalry and deceptive tactics, they lured the Roman army into the open desert near the town of Carrhae. There, Crassus and his legions were torn apart in a humiliating defeat. His son was killed before his eyes, his soldiers were scattered, and Crassus himself captured. What happened next is a matter of chilling legend. According to Roman and later sources, the Parthians executed Crassus in a way that would haunt the Roman imagination forever. They held him down, pried open his mouth, and poured molten gold straight down his throat. Why to mock the very thing he worshipped? Crassus had lived for gold, hoarded it, traded it, even betrayed his allies for it. In death, he was made to consume it in its most violent form. Let's pause and consider what that means. Molten gold reaches over 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit, far beyond the temperature needed to burn skin. When it enters the throat, it doesn't just scald it, liquefies tissue. The tongue would split like boiled meat. The esophagus would collapse in on itself. Gold doesn't pour cleanly, it sticks. It clings to flesh like napalm, and because it's heavier than water, it would sink into the lungs, replacing air with burning metal. There are no screams, just the gurgle of death bubbling in gold. Some historians debate the literal truth of this execution. It may have been embellished an echo of Rome's disgust at Crassus's greed. But even as symbolism, it's horrifying. It tells you something about how the ancients thought. Death wasn't just about ending a life. It was about sending a message so violent, so specific, that even your enemies would whisper it for centuries, and whisper they did. And Roman historians couldn't stop retelling the story, how Crassus's severed head was later used as a prop in a Parthian play, mocking the Romans. How his fall was the beginning of the end for the fragile alliance between Caesar and Pompey. How his ghost loomed over the collapse of the Republic itself. Crassus wasn't just a casualty, he became a cautionary tale, and the gold that once built his empire became the poison that ended it. There's a macabre beauty to the execution and ironic poetry. A man dies by the very thing he lived for. But it's also a window into how the ancient world viewed punishment. The more personal the crime, the more symbolic the execution. It wasn't enough to kill a greedy man. He had to be consumed by his greed. This was theater. Political theater, yes, but also spiritual. In the eyes of the Parthians, they weren't just killing Crassus. They were purifying the world of his corruption. They were crafting a myth, a morality tale cast in gold and fire. And it worked. For over 2,000 years, his death has fascinated historians, artists, and storytellers. Because there's something deeply unsettling about it. We all chase wealth. We all want more. But what happens when that hunger leads us into the fire? Crassus reminds us that sometimes the thing we crave most is what will destroy us in the end. But as grotesque as his death was, it's only the beginning of this journey. Because the next execution doesn't just burn the body, it peels it apart 1 inch at a time until all that's left is red twitching flesh. And eyes still blinking in agony. There's a special kind of horror in the idea of being flayed alive. Not stabbed, not burned, not beheaded, but peeled, inch by inch, layer by layer. Your skin, your body's first and most sensitive defense against pain, ripped away while you remain alive, alert and screaming. It's not just death, it's transformation, from human into something else. In the blood-soaked world of ancient Assyria, this wasn't uncommon. The Assyrians didn't just conquer, they ruled through terror. They etched fear into the bones of their enemies and made sure everyone remembered. One of their most feared methods of execution, flaying. The complete removal of a person's skin while they were still breathing. And it wasn't just for criminals or rebels. Kings were flayed. Nobles were flayed. Entire cities watched as their leaders were stripped of their humanity, literally. One of the most infamous examples is the case of Sisessa, the king of the Elamites, a rival people to the Assyrians. After his defeat, he wasn't simply killed. He was tied to a post in full view of his surviving troops. And then the executioners got to work. They didn't rush. That wasn't the point. They used small curved knives, razor sharp but delicate. The goal was to cut under the skin just enough to loosen it, then pull it back slowly, methodically, like unraveling parchment. They started at the legs, working upward, slicing around joints, peeling whole sheets of skin from thighs, chest, arms. Blood poured freely, of course, but carefully too much, and the victim would lose consciousness. The Assyrians were masters at keeping their subjects alive just long enough to truly suffer. Imagine it. The wind hitting your raw, bleeding muscles. Every nerve exposed. Every gust of air a lance of agony. You're blind from blood, but your ears still work. You hear the jeers, the laughing, the ripping sound of your own flesh being pulled away like bark from a tree. Your body spasms in protest, but you're too tightly bound to move. You scream until your voice is no more than a rasp. And even then, the pain continues. Ancient reliefs carved into palace walls proudly display these acts. You can still see them today, scenes of kneeling men, skin stretched out behind them like a cloak, Assyrian soldiers smiling as they work. These weren't hidden crimes. They were official policy, messages carved in muscle. And when the skin was finally removed, it didn't go to waste. It was nailed to city walls, draped over gates, hung like a banner to say, "This is what happens when you defy us." To the Assyrians, flaying was an art of domination. It broke not just the body, but the spirit of an entire people. One flayed corpse could silence 1,000. It was a performance meant to haunt survivors, to make them tremble every time they remembered the screams. And there's something fundamentally different about flaying from other executions. Beheadings are fast, crucifixions are slow, but flaying makes the victim watch as they're unmade. It's not just the pain, it's the horror of seeing yourself reduced to a raw, twitching creature. A horror so deep it burrows into the bones of everyone who sees it. Sisesa's flaying wasn't the only one. The Assyrians kept doing it over and over. They flayed rebels in Babylon. They flayed nobles in Israel. They flayed priests, generals, even their own people if they stepped out of line. It wasn't justice, it was theater. A display of raw power soaked in blood and misery. And even centuries later, in the quiet halls of museums, those stone reliefs still carry the echoes of screams. You can see the curled lips, the twisted bodies, the lifeless skin hanging limp in a soldier's hand. It's all there, frozen in stone but far from silent. Of all the ways to die in the ancient world, flaying stands apart, not just for the pain, but for the message. It says, we don't want you dead, we want you broken. And we want everyone else to see it. But if you think that's the worst death the ancients had to offer, you haven't heard the screams from inside the belly of a burning bronze beast. Because the next execution didn't just aim to destroy the body, it turned agony into music. It looked like a statue, a tribute to power, a shining bronze bull polished to a golden sheen resting on a stone platform. But this was no monument. It was a coffin, a torture chamber, a furnace designed not just to kill, but to turn pain into performance. The invention of the bronze bull is credited to Perillos of Athens, a man whose name should have been forgotten, but whose imagination earned him eternal infamy. He approached the tyrant, Phalaris, the cruel ruler of Acragas in Sicily, with a gift. A new form of execution, a marvel of metalwork and sadism. The bull was hollow with a door in its side. A man could fit perfectly inside. A fire would be lit beneath its belly. The metal would heat slowly, and the victim trapped within would roast alive, their screams echoing inside the beast. But Perillos didn't stop there. He added a twisted flourish. Pipes and tubes were connected to the bull's nostrils and mouth. They were tuned to distort the screams, bending human agony into sound. The cries of the dying would emerge from the bull's head as music transformed into what Perillos called the bellowing of a beast. It wasn't just an execution, it was a performance, a concert of suffering. Phalaris, amused and intrigued, asked for a demonstration, but not with a prisoner. He ordered Perillos himself to climb inside. Imagine the moment. The inventor stepping proudly into his creation, still believing he would be pulled out after a brief test. The door slams shut, the fire is lit, and suddenly the metal beneath his feet grows warm, then hot, then unbearable. He screams, he claws at the bronze walls, but the only thing the onlookers hear is a low, eerie bellowing. Not quite human, not quite animal. A ghostly sound echoing from the bull's mouth as flames lick its belly. Some versions of the story say Phalaris had Perillos pulled out before he died, only to throw him from a cliff moments later. Others say he left him inside until his bones were charred black. Either way, the message was clear: invent cruelty, and you may be its first victim. But the bull didn't die with Perillos. Phalaris used it again and again. Political enemies, rebels, priests, anyone who opposed him found themselves locked inside the belly of the beast. The process was always the same: stripped naked, shoved into the dark chamber door sealed shut. The fire stoked slowly, cruelly, ensuring that death was not immediate. The metal would heat gradually, turning the air into an oven, the walls into a griddle. The victim would try to stand, but the floor burned their feet. They would jump, twist, slam against the walls, but there was no escape. The heat grew unbearable. Skin blistered and split, hair ignited, muscles clenched into spasms. Eventually the lungs collapsed. The final screams became hoarse, then shrill, then silent. Outside, the audience would gather to listen, to watch the bronze shimmer with fire, to hear the bellowing, grotesque, musical, inhuman. A symphony of agony played through pipes. The bull became a symbol of tyranny so potent that later empires tried to erase it from memory, and yet the idea survived. Even the Romans spoke of it with horror. Lucian, a writer from the 2nd century CE, claimed that the bones of victims were so burned that they shone like jewels and were turned into keepsakes, trinkets for the powerful. There's something uniquely monstrous about the bronze bull. It wasn't designed for justice. It wasn't even about fear. It was about art. Pain sculpted into sound. Suffering made beautiful. A lie told to the ears so the mind could deny what the eyes could not. And it worked. The crowd didn't hear a man die. They heard a song. But the bull is just one form of sadism refined to elegance. The next execution strips away all such illusions. It's not theatrical. It's not symbolic. It's raw, primal, and far slower than anything we've seen so far. A man trapped in his own filth, devoured from within by vermin day after day. Still breathing, still conscious, still begging for death. There are deaths you can imagine. Beheading, hanging. Even burning, as awful as it is, follows a logic the human mind can grasp. But then, there's this. A method of execution so sickening, so degrading, so biologically invasive, that it reads more like a myth than a punishment. And yet, according to multiple sources, it happened. Scaphism. The slowest, most revolting death sentence of the ancient Persian Empire. The victim wasn't stabbed, shot, or burned. No. He was fed, force-fed, in fact. Milk and honey again and again until he vomited, until diarrhea leaked from his body uncontrollably. Then he was stripped naked and placed between 2 hollowed-out canoes or boats. His arms, legs, and head sticking out, the rest of his body sealed inside like meat in a sandwich. He couldn't move, couldn't wipe away the filth, couldn't scratch the skin that would soon crawl with life. But the Persians didn't stop there. More milk, more honey, poured over his face, his eyes, his genitals, his anus. Every inch of him was coated in a sickly sweet invitation. Not for gods, not for mercy, but for flies, for ants, for wasps, maggots, and every creeping thing nature hides in its shadows. The victim became a feast, not just for the insects on the surface, but for the ones that would soon live inside him. It wasn't quick, it wasn't clean. It was a slow-motion descent into rot. The body blistered under the sun, skin peeled. The stench became unbearable, worse than death, because death hadn't come yet. In fact, it would be days, sometimes weeks before it did. One recorded case tells of Mithridates, a soldier who insulted King Artaxerxes II. His sentence, scaphism. According to the Greek historian Plutarch, Mithridates lasted 17 days. 17 days alive in his own waste, covered in flies burrowed into by larvae, his flesh literally being eaten while he remained conscious. His eyes swelled shut, his lips blistered, his screams weakened, then returned when insects gnawed at new nerve endings. Rats came at night. Worms thrived in his open sores. And all the while his body rotted from the inside out. Imagine that. Not dying of your wounds, but with them. Living as your body decomposes. Feeling the line blur between man and corpse. You're no longer a prisoner. You're a hive. A breeding ground. A decaying island drifting in a swamp surrounded by buzzing, crawling death. And this wasn't just torture, it was theater. The execution site would be placed in a stagnant marsh where insects flourished. Soldiers stood guard to keep the condemned from escaping or taking their own life. Locals came to watch. to witness the enemy of the king become less than human. It was the ultimate display of dominance, death by consumption. Not swift, not merciful, just slowly devoured. What makes scaphism so uniquely terrifying is its precision. It didn't just kill the body, it corrupted it. It turned digestion into degradation. The milk and honey weren't kindness, they were weapons. The sweetness became sour. The life-sustaining became life-ending. And through it all, the victim was alive, forced to feel every insect bite, every inch of swollen flesh, every drop of sweat that couldn't be wiped away. Scaphism is rarely mentioned in school books or popular history, and maybe that's for the best. It is perhaps the darkest execution ever conceived. Because it didn't rely on fire or steel, it relied on time, on decay, on the terrifying patience of nature. But as horrifying as being eaten alive is the next method on our descent into ancient madness, takes us back to man-made horror. To the cold, sharp sound of a saw. Not cutting wood, but slicing a human body. Lengthwise, most executions, even the cruelest ones, involve some point of mercy, however fleeting. A single blow, a choking breath, a final scream before silence. But not this. Sawing a man in half vertically from the groin up is not just about death. It's about making the victim watch as they are slowly and deliberately split in two. And the way it was done, designed to keep them alive for as long as possible. This method appeared in different cultures, Rome, the Ottoman Empire, and even in some early Christian martyr stories. But regardless of the era, the principle was the same: tie the condemned upside-down leg spread and bring out the saw. Why upside down? Because hanging that way keeps blood in the brain, it prevents shock, it prolongs consciousness, meaning the person is wide awake, fully aware as the saw bites into the soft tissue between their legs. The executioners start there, always there, the most vulnerable place. They move up slowly, inch by inch, through muscle and intestine bone. They do not rush. Rushing would be a mercy. The saw isn't fast. It's hand-drawn back and forth, grinding and tearing with each pull. The nerves scream. The organs convulse. Blood pours, but not enough to kill quickly. It's a precision act of horror, using the body's own circulatory system to keep it alive while the structure of self is destroyed. Imagine it. Hanging by your ankles, watching as your chest comes closer with every cut. Feeling your body shift separate, come undone. There's no escape. The pain is constant, climbing, building, yet never quite pushing you over the edge into unconsciousness. The brain clings to awareness, forced to witness its own unmaking. In some reports, victims remained conscious until the saw reached the abdomen. In others, they survived until the rib cage was cracked open. Can you fathom what it feels like to hear your own sternum split? To feel your ribs bend and snap one by one as the blade continues its journey. The stories vary, but one thing remains consistent. This execution was public. It was meant to be seen. The crowd watched not just a death, but a demonstration. A message: defy us and we will unravel you. One particularly disturbing version tells of its use against early Christians, with Saint Isaiah allegedly suffering this fate. Whether the account is legend or truth, the image it conjures is unforgettable. A man of faith, hands-bound eyes, skyward as the saw splits his body open like a rotting tree. Some records speak of the condemned being forced to watch others suffer first, to hear the screams, to see the blood drip from the platform. Their turn came next, with the saw already warm from previous victims. And here's what makes it worse: this method didn't require advanced tools. No bronze bulls, no flames. Just two men with a saw and time. That's all it took to turn a body into a spectacle of agony. Even after death, the corpse would often be displayed halved red and raw, sometimes hung on city gates. It wasn't just about eliminating the traitor. It was about scarring the memory of everyone who saw them die. That was the true purpose: psychological warfare. Sawing in half was brutality with calculation. Not madness, but method. It didn't come from rage. It came from cold, deliberate planning. A lesson written not in ink, but in blood and bone. And if this felt inhuman, the next story might be worse. Because at least with a saw, you knew your killers. In the next execution, the killer was invisible. Quiet, patient. A single blade of bamboo growing slowly beneath the victim, piercing up through the spine, not with speed or violence, but with silence. This is perhaps the most quietly terrifying execution ever imagined, not because of screaming fire or gushing blood, but because of what it doesn't do. It doesn't tear. It doesn't burn. It doesn't even strike. It simply waits. Bamboo, a plant, peaceful green, beautiful. But under the right conditions, it becomes something else entirely. A weapon, a predator, a blade that grows not inches in seconds, but inches in days, relentless and unfeeling. And in one of the most chilling execution methods whispered through legend and rumor. This gentle stalk was turned into a slow-motion spear that grew through the living body. Victims were tied tightly back, arched limbs stretched and positioned just above young bamboo shoots green, thin, seemingly harmless. But bamboo is one of the fastest-growing plants on Earth. Under the humid, swampy conditions of Southeast Asia or southern China, it can grow as much as 3 inches per day. That's 0.1 inch per hour. And that means a shoot placed under a human body can given time penetrate flesh. It didn't start with pain. That was part of the horror. The first day, just discomfort. A sharp pressure against the skin. Something ticklish. By the second day, there's an ache. A bruise. By the third, skin splits. Muscle yields. The shoot sharpened by nature begins its journey inside. Not by force, but by persistence. No one touches the victim. No one comes near. They simply lie there helpless as the living blade tunnels upward. Through the lower back, into the stomach. Eventually piercing organs slowly, cleanly, like a surgeon's scalpel. But unlike surgery, there's no anesthesia. Just the full awake realization that the earth itself is killing you. Imagine lying there bound, unable to move or scream for long. You feel it pushing inside you. You know it's not stopping. It's not man that's killing you, it's time. It's nature. It's the unrelenting truth that you are not built to resist the patience of the world. Some tales claim this method was used by ancient Chinese dynasties or Southeast Asian kingdoms against spies and traitors. Others say it's myth, but biology suggests otherwise. In controlled experiments, albeit with inanimate targets, bamboo has been shown to puncture raw meat, even bone. The principle is grotesquely sound. What makes this method so profoundly disturbing isn't just the pain. It's the helplessness, the stillness. You're not being acted upon by a person. There's no whip to dodge, no fire to escape. Just a stalk of green. Growing. You can't beg it to stop. You can't reason with it. You can only wait. Wait to be pierced. Wait to be impaled. Wait to be split open by something that doesn't even know you're there. And the fear doesn't just live in the victim. It creeps into the minds of those who watch. Because what kind of world is this where nature itself becomes executioner? Where the same plant that feeds you and shades you can also penetrate you slowly in silence? There are no flames, no music, no soldiers. Just the sound of the wind, the buzz of insects, and the agonized breathing of a man watching his death grow taller beneath him. Whether bamboo torture was a widespread method or a folkloric warning, it doesn't matter. The terror lies in its plausibility. It reminds us that in the ancient world, death didn't need weapons. Just patience, just cruelty, just a little time. And now, as we emerge from the shadow of the bamboo grove, we come to the final stage of this journey. We've seen death by metal, by fire, by blade, by vermin, and by plant. But what does it all mean? What did these deaths teach? What did they leave behind? The final chapter is not a killing, it's a reflection, a mirror held to the face of history and to us. 5 deaths. 5 ways the ancient world twisted punishment into performance, pain into power. Crassus choked with molten gold, a warning etched in wealth. Secessa, his skin peeled away as his people watched fear stitched into the fabric of memory. The bronze bull screams distorted into music. Agony turned into applause. Mithridates devoured a live body, and dignity consumed over 17 hellish days. And the bamboo victim impaled not by sword, but by time itself. These weren't just executions. They were messages. Loud, grotesque messages from regimes that understood something chilling. A death forgotten is useless, but a death remembered. That's control. That's obedience. That's power. The ancient world didn't hide its cruelty behind steel doors and sterile walls. It made death visible. It made you hear it, smell it, feel it. It wasn't just about eliminating a threat, it was about reshaping the minds of everyone who survived. These rituals of violence were not born from chaos, but from calculation. Someone had to invent the bronze bull. Someone had to decide a man should be split from groin to skull rather than neck to spine. These weren't accidents. They were innovations. And maybe that's the most terrifying truth of all. Cruelty isn't a glitch in human history. It's a feature, a system, a tool sharpened by civilization itself. We like to think we've evolved, that we've moved past these horrors, but have we? Or have we simply found cleaner ways to kill sanitized methods? Painless needles. Death behind curtains far from the public eye. But ask yourself, are we less cruel or just less honest about it? And maybe that's why these ancient deaths still haunt us. Because deep down they reveal what we're capable of when we stop pretending to be merciful. When death becomes art. When pain becomes a language. So now that you've seen what the ancients did, ask yourself, which death would you fear most? Let us know in the comments below. Would you rather be consumed from within or roasted alive for a crowd's amusement? Would you take the saw over the bamboo, or is the silence of scaphism the most horrifying of all? If you found this journey through humanity's darkest nightmares as disturbing and fascinating, as we did, make sure to subscribe for more haunting history and hidden horrors. Like the video to support the channel and share it with someone who thinks they've seen it all. Trust us, they haven't. And if you want to go even deeper into the blood-soaked past, check out our next video, The Emperor Who Turned His Palace into a Torture Garden. You won't sleep after that one. Until next time. Remember, history doesn't just repeat itself. Sometimes, it sharpens its blades first. Thanks for watching. Stay curious, stay safe. And don't look away. You never know who's watching.